When Harold and Evelyn Rusk vanished during their usual morning walk in 2022, it seemed like a heartbreaking, if all too common, story. An elderly couple in their 70s, both showing early signs of dementia, disappeared without a trace in the vast Milfield wilderness. Search teams scoured the trails, helicopters buzzed overhead, and volunteers combed the woods. But after weeks of searching, nothing. The case grew cold. Most believed they had simply gotten lost, succumbed to the elements, and would never be found. But then, 2 years later, a troop of Boy Scouts out for a weekend hike stumbled upon something buried beneath an uprooted tree, something that would unravel the original story and expose a horrifying truth that no one could have imagined. What really happened to Harold and Evelyn Rusk? And why did someone go to such lengths to make sure their bodies were never found? Let's begin. It was a crisp September morning in Milfield, the kind of day where the leaves hinted at autumn, but the sun still warmed your skin. Harold and Evelyn Rusk, married for nearly 50 years, laced up their walking shoes like they did every day. Their morning ritual, a quiet 2-mile walk through the wooded trails near their home, was sacred. Evelyn believed it kept Harold's mind sharper, a way to slow the creeping fog of early dementia that had begun to settle in. They waved to a neighbor who was out with his dog, made small talk about the weather, and vanished somewhere between the parking lot and the pine-scented trailhead. By noon, their daughter Maggie grew concerned. When repeated calls to her parents' cell phones went unanswered, she drove to the trail herself. Their car was still parked. The picnic lunch Evelyn had packed sat untouched on the passenger seat. By evening, a full-scale search was underway. Dozens of volunteers joined law enforcement in combing every foot of the Milfield Trail. Dogs picked up faint scents that led nowhere. Drones scanned the tree canopy. No broken branches, no dropped items, no signs of struggle. Just silence, as if they had simply stepped off the path and out of the world. For the next 3 weeks, the search for Harold and Evelyn Rusk dominated local headlines. News crews filmed volunteers wading through dense underbrush, calling their names into the still air. Flyers plastered every cafe window and community bulletin board. The town of Milfield, a place where everyone knew everyone, held its collective breath. Detectives considered every possibility. Had they wandered off the trail and gotten lost? Fallen into one of the steep ravines? Or had something more sinister happened? But without evidence, no footprints, no blood, no dropped possessions, the case stalled. Experts brought in for consultation said it was likely they had become disoriented, especially with Harold's condition, and succumbed to the elements. They probably just laid down together, one search leader said, and didn't wake up. Eventually, the search was scaled back. Hope faded into grief, and for 2 long years, the forest kept its secret buried beneath moss, roots, and silence. It was early spring, 2 years after the Rusks vanished. Troop 847 was out on a weekend hike, earning their wilderness badges. The Milfield Trail was familiar ground, safe, quiet, and well-marked. Mist hung low among the trees, the kind that made pine needles glisten and every breath feel like adventure. "Stay on the marked path, boys," Scoutmaster Rodriguez called out as 12 scouts spread out, crunching over pine cones and damp leaves. But one scout, Tommy Jordan, just 13 and full of curiosity, strayed a little farther. A massive oak tree had toppled in last winter's storms, its roots jutting upward like the ribs of some ancient beast. Beneath it, a dark hollow had formed where dirt had shifted and roots curled back like fingers. "Hey, Mr. Rodriguez," Tommy called, "come look at this cool root system." Expecting a science moment, Rodriguez knelt beside the boy, but his smile faded as he saw something white poking from the earth. At first, it looked like a rock, but it had too much curve. Then the glint of metal caught his eye. A femur, with a titanium hip implant still attached. His voice went hard and sharp. "Everyone back to the main trail. Now." Tommy froze. "Don't touch anything." The troop fell silent. Their morning of fresh air and nature journaling had turned into a real-life nightmare. Rodriguez called 911, voice tight with urgency. "We're on Milfield Trail, about 2 miles in. We found what appears to be human remains." Within 30 minutes, the trail swarmed with flashing lights and yellow tape. Forensics teams moved in. The boys, wide-eyed and shaken, huddled together on the trail. What started as a hike for merit badges had just reopened a mystery the town thought was buried forever. Detective Sarah Miller arrived on scene with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen it all, but even she wasn't prepared for what lay beneath the tree. The titanium hip implant made immediate identification possible, but it was the condition of the scene that raised red flags. Dr. Martinez, the medical examiner, crouched beside the partially exposed skeleton. Elderly female, he murmured. Bone density and joint wear match. This implant is still legible. Serial number should give us a positive ID. Beside the bones, half buried in the soil, lay a walking stick. Its dark cherry wood handle was worn smooth, the rubber grip still mostly intact. Not something you'd expect after 2 years in the wilderness. Miller's eyes narrowed. The area wasn't just random. Someone had taken care to cover the body with heavy stones, enough to prevent animals from disturbing it. The bones weren't scattered, and the burial appeared deliberate. This wasn't an accident, she told her partner. This was staged to stay hidden. By the time the skeleton was fully recovered, the forest was no longer just a quiet stretch of trail. It was an active crime scene, and the missing persons file from 2 years ago had just been upgraded to homicide. By the next morning, the serial number from the hip implant had confirmed what Detective Miller already suspected. The remains belonged to Evelyn Rusk, age 73, retired school librarian, wife of Harold Rusk, and missing for exactly 728 days. The case file was reopened with fresh urgency, but one critical question remained. Where was Harold? Detective Miller placed the call at 6:23 a.m. Pacific time. Caleb Rusk, Evelyn and Harold's adopted son, was jolted awake in his Seattle apartment. A detective himself, Caleb had worked late on a string of break-ins. He wasn't ready for what was coming. "This is Detective Miller from Milfield PD," the voice said. "I'm calling about your parents." His coffee mug slipped from his hand, shattering on the tile. 2 years. 2 years of not knowing. 2 years of believing they had simply gotten lost. Now someone was telling him they had found a body. "We believe the remains belong to your mother," Miller continued. "We'll need you to come to Milfield to confirm identification." The ache in Caleb's chest wasn't just grief. It was rage. Quiet, growing rage. If someone had hurt Evelyn, if someone had buried her like garbage in the woods, then this wasn't over. It was just beginning. The flight from Seattle to Milfield felt like both a blink and an eternity. Caleb stared out the airplane window, watching clouds drift by like slow-moving ghosts. He couldn't stop replaying his last phone call with Evelyn. She had sounded optimistic, hopeful that Harold's new medication might slow the progression of his dementia. They had been planning a cruise for their 50th anniversary. The tickets were still in her jewelry box, untouched, now useless. Detective Miller met him at the airport, a compact woman with sharp eyes and a quiet, commanding presence. Her handshake was firm, professional. "I'm sorry about your mother," she said as they drove toward the medical examiner's office. Inside, Caleb faced what no son should ever have to. The remains, clean, skeletal, lay arranged on a sterile table. But it was the walking stick beside them that shattered him. Cherrywood, custom grip, initials ER carved by hand. He remembered the birthday morning he'd given it to her. She had laughed through tears, clutching him tight. That stick had helped her walk, helped her fight her arthritis, and now, impossibly, it had survived her. Become evidence in a murder case. Caleb whispered, "It's her." And just like that, his life split in two, before and after. As Caleb stood outside the medical examiner's office, cold October wind cutting through his jacket, his detective instincts kicked in. Something wasn't right. Why had no trace been found during the original search? Why was Evelyn buried with care? Stones placed to protect her remains. And most of all, where was Harold? Caleb visited the family home next, greeted by his sister Maggie. She wore an apron dusted with flour, her smile stiff. "So sorry about Mom," she said, ushering him inside. The living room looked different, family photos gone, new furniture in place, just trying to make it feel like home. But Caleb noticed something else. Smoke drifted from the fireplace. despite the unseasonably warm afternoon, and the air inside smelled like burning paper. Maggie claimed she was cleaning out old documents Evelyn had hoarded for decades. But Evelyn had been meticulously organized. She didn't burn things. She filed them. Something was off. Caleb excused himself under the pretense of using the bathroom, but quietly stepped toward the fireplace instead. Flames still flickered inside, devouring what looked like legal-sized documents. Edges curling black, ink smearing into unreadable blotches. But one fragment hadn't fully burned. It lay at the edge of the hearth, singed but intact enough to reveal a signature in blue ink. Richard T. Blackwood, attorney at law. Caleb's pulse spiked. The name wasn't familiar, but the timing was suspicious. Why would Maggie be burning legal paperwork, especially if their parents had gone missing under unclear circumstances? He slipped the fragment into his jacket pocket, carefully keeping his expression neutral as he returned to the kitchen. Maggie was pouring coffee, her voice smooth but her eyes sharp. "Long day," he said with a polite smile. "Yeah," she replied, "long couple of years." But now Caleb had a lead, and he was going to follow it. The next morning, Caleb followed the only clue he had, the name Richard T. Blackwood. A quick online search revealed a small estate law firm, Blackwood and Associates, located in a fading strip mall on the edge of Milfield. But when Caleb walked in, the receptionist barely looked up. "Mr. Blackwood doesn't work here anymore," she said as if rehearsed. "When did he leave?" Caleb asked. "About 6 months ago." That would have been around the time the insurance company started asking questions about the Rusks' disappearance. Caleb leaned in. "I'm their son. This is about my parents' will." The receptionist hesitated, then scribbled an address on a sticky note. "He freelances now. You didn't get this from me." The address led to a rundown apartment building with flaking paint and broken mailboxes. When Blackwood finally opened the door, his eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking. "I was wondering when someone would come," he said. Inside the cluttered apartment, Richard Blackwood crumbled like dry paper. He admitted everything. "Maggie came to me with medical documentation claiming your father was mentally unfit," he said. "She wanted to change the will. Said your parents had agreed. But your mom was resisting." When Caleb pressed him, one name kept surfacing: Danny Martinez, a consultant Maggie had hired to apply pressure. Blackwood didn't know the details, just that Martinez had visited the Rusks right before they disappeared. "He wasn't a lawyer," Blackwood said quietly. "He was muscle. A name. A direction." Now Caleb had someone new to find. Caleb tracked Danny Martinez to a shabby apartment complex on the edge of town. He knocked. No answer. Something felt wrong. He tested the doorknob. Locked. A quick kick splintered the frame, and what he saw inside froze him. Martinez was face down in the living room, surrounded by a spreading pool of blood. 3 stab wounds marked his back. It was execution, not accident. Beside the body, Caleb spotted something strange. A long blonde hair caught on Martinez's watch band. Evelyn's hair? No, this was recent. Caleb's gut twisted. Someone was tying up loose ends, and they knew he was getting close. The next day, Caleb drove straight to Evan's apartment, his brother's nervous text suddenly making sense. Evan answered the door in wrinkled clothes, eyes wide with panic. "What's going on, Caleb?" "We need to talk," Caleb said, pushing past him. The apartment was a disaster. Bottles, papers, junk everywhere. But it was the gray hoodie draped over the couch that stopped Caleb cold. The same one from the surveillance footage at Martinez's building. And on the kitchen table, a folding knife. Dark stains along the blade. "You were there," Caleb whispered. Evan's eyes welled with tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen." Pain exploded at the back of Caleb's skull. Everything went black. He woke tied to a rusted pipe in a cold, abandoned warehouse. Across from him, Maggie sat on an overturned crate, calm as ever. Evan paced behind her, chain-smoking, his hands trembling. "You always had to be the hero," Maggie said, her voice flat and bitter. "Mom and Dad gave everything to you." "They loved you too," Caleb muttered. "Not enough," she snapped. Evan broke first. "It was supposed to be simple. Martinez was just supposed to scare them. But Mom fought back. She hit him. He panicked. Maggie cut in coldly. And Harold? He wouldn't stop asking for her. Wouldn't sign the will. So we kept him quiet. Caleb stared at them in horror. You killed them. For money? No, Maggie hissed. We did it for what we were owed. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Help was coming. But would it arrive in time? The warehouse door burst open with a thunderous crash. Detective Miller and 3 armed officers flooded in, weapons drawn. Drop the gun, she shouted. Evan stood frozen, tears streaking his face. The revolver slipped from his trembling hand and clattered to the floor. He collapsed to his knees, hands raised. Thank God, he whispered. It's finally over. Maggie wasn't so willing. Police intercepted her at the family home, suitcase in hand, about to flee. Her confident mask cracked as they cuffed her. You're making a mistake, she screamed. But the evidence and Evan's confession spoke louder. The Rusk case was no longer a mystery. It was murder. The courtroom was silent as the verdicts were read. Guilty. Life sentences. No parole. Maggie stared ahead, emotionless. Evan wept openly, shoulders shaking under the weight of everything he'd done. His testimony, raw, broken, and unflinching, had painted a vivid picture of guilt and manipulation. Richard Blackwood, the disgraced attorney, received 20 years and was permanently disbarred. Neither sibling looked at Caleb during sentencing. The fraudulent will was voided. Everything Harold and Evelyn had built, every account, every asset, was restored to the son they had chosen. But for Caleb, justice wasn't about money. It was about truth. And finally they had it. Caleb didn't keep the inheritance. Instead, he created the Harold and Evelyn Rusk Foundation, a scholarship fund for adopted children pursuing higher education. The family home became transitional housing for adoptive families, a safe place for kids starting over. Everything was gone, except their wedding rings. Caleb had them melted down into a memorial plaque placed at their shared grave. It read simply, chosen, loved, remembered. On a cold November morning, he stood alone after their funeral. I never wanted your money, he whispered to the soil, just the love you gave so freely. I'll carry that forever. And he walked away, never alone.